Hello my fellow nerds and welcome to the Nerd Empire. I hope you all are having a fantastic day today, and I hope you all will enjoy today's reaction video. With that being said, let's get right into it, shall we? But this one is called Prehistoric Mystery: What Really Killed the Giant Insects. So let's get right into it, shall we?
$350 million years ago, Earth was the embodiment of a nightmare. In the swampy thickets and dense heavy air of prehistoric jungles, giant insects crawled on the ground and soared in the air. So enormous that their size dwarfed their modern counterparts many times over. So dangerous that they could...
I think, if I remember correctly, I believe one of the reasons why a lot of the insects were so freaking giant was because, like, one of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the reasons was the oxygen level of the planet.
Could have easily have made you their prey. But one day, their reign was suddenly over. Some were forced to shrink, while others vanished from the face of the planet forever. Why did this happen? What, or even who, was responsible for their demise? For a long time, scientists around the world searched for the answer. Then researchers from the University of California conducted one of the largest paleontological studies ever. They analyzed more than 10,000 fossils spanning hundreds of millions of years of evolution. The results changed everything. It turned out that climate change wasn't the only reason for the disappearance of giant insects. There was another cause. Something began hunting them. Carboniferous period. Vast thickets of prehistoric jungle, swampy terrain, towering ferns, and giant horsetails. Here, in this green wilderness, ancient insects were in charge. They were so massive they would hardly fit into the modern world. This was the Carboniferous period, an era when evolution gave insects a chance to take over the planet. But how? Imagine a world where trees didn't decay, but simply died and fell into the swamps, remaining there for millions of years. The ancient plants of the Carboniferous world actively absorbed carbon dioxide and released oxygen into the atmosphere, slowly altering the air's composition. But when the life cycle of these plants ended, the process was very different from today. There was no decomposition. Bacteria hadn't yet evolved the ability to break down wood. So dead trees didn't disappear, they sank into the wetlands, layer upon layer, accumulating as dense, undecomposed organic matter. It was from these deposits that coal eventually formed. And the carbon dioxide once absorbed by plants remained trapped underground. As a result of these processes, the oxygen level in the air reached a record 35% compared to the 21% we breathe today. A thunderstorm in that era could ignite wildfires on an unimaginable scale. One lightning strike and a forest saturated with oxygen would become a blazing inferno. Even damp wood could ignite from the smallest spark. At the same time, this oxygen overdose allowed insects to grow to unimaginable sizes. Picture this: you're driving your car. Suddenly, smack, something hits the windshield. Just a dragonfly. Your wiper sweeps it away. But if it were a dragonfly from the Carboniferous period, the consequences would be far more dire. Dragonflies of that era were 10 times the size of their modern relatives. With wingspans of up to 2.3 feet, they were among the largest flying insects of all time, comparable in size to a hawk.
I can't imagine having bugs the size of from the Carboniferous period in today's world. Nobody would be leaving their fucking house.
But how were insects able to grow so large? It all comes down to their respiratory system. Instead of lungs, insects have a network of trachea, tiny tubes that deliver oxygen directly to their tissues. In today's atmosphere, this limits their size. The larger the insect, the harder it is to transport oxygen efficiently. But in a high oxygen environment, breathing became more effective, removing the physiological barriers to growth. And so, nature gave rise to the evolution of giants. Today you might encounter a giant centipede up to 12 inches long. Its appearance alone might make your skin crawl, but in the Carboniferous, millipedes could inspire true horror. The largest reached up to 8.5 feet. And
yeah, no, fuck that. Fuck. No, I'd be getting a grenade launcher and blowing that thing up to 1,000,000 fucking pieces. Just all sorts of nope. All the nope in the world that can be ever mustered.
Weighed around 110 pounds. And their diet included more than just plants. They were active predators, hunting anything in their path. If you'd found yourself in their world, you would have likely attracted their attention too. For an immense span of time, these giant insects ruled the planet, both in the skies and on the ground. But
Gail Klein, oh, it's a subscriber. I think that's for YouTube. Yep, that's for YouTube. It's for you, boob.
eventually everything changed. These giants disappeared, leaving behind the tiny, harmless insects we know today. But why? What or who caused their extinction? Drop in oxygen levels. 305 million years ago, the Carboniferous period was drawing to a close. In the dense, steamy jungles of the ancient world, among giant horsetails and ferns, still crawls Arthropleura. That very millipede the length of a car. Enormous dragonflies lazily fluttered above the treetops, but both they and their monstrous scorpion cousins, 10 times larger than today's counterparts, had only a few million years left. Soon, most of them would vanish. Today, scientists state with confidence that the extinction of these giant creatures wasn't caused by a catastrophic event like the asteroid impact that wiped out the dinosaurs. The truth was much simpler, and, at the same time, more insidious. The insect world practically began to suffocate.
I can't imagine the size of a fucking spider. I already have arachnophobia. A spider from the Carboniferous period, I'd probably have a fucking heart attack. Just no. Just, you know, take an HE bomb to those fucking things. Because that's the only way to just erase their existence.
In the final few millions of years of the Carboniferous, the planet began to change rapidly. The great green kingdom of humid forests could not last forever. Giant swamps dried up, and forests broke apart into isolated patches. This process would later be named the Carboniferous rainforest collapse. It was during this time that invisible players entered the scene. New types of bacteria that Earth had never seen before. Before their arrival, wood and dead plants remained untouched, accumulating in the soil. But these microbes learned how to break down lignin, a tough component of plant cell walls. As decomposition began, carbon dioxide was released en masse into the atmosphere. The oxygen levels that once fueled the growth of giant insects began to plummet. The world was transforming. Forests fragmented and oxygen became more and more scarce. For giant millipedes and dragonflies, this new, thinner air became a deadly trap. By the middle of the Permian period, which began 299 million years ago and lasted for 50 million years, oxygen levels in the atmosphere dropped to 22%, almost the same as what we breathe today. For giant insects, adapted to the oxygen-rich atmosphere of the Carboniferous, this was a serious challenge. But the struggle for survival continued. Despite the disappearance of many giants, some species stubbornly held on. One of these surviving legends was Meganeuropsis permiana, a true aerial predator of the Permian period. Even in the thinner atmosphere, this beauty could grow up to 17 inches in body length, with a wingspan of an impressive 28 inches. However, with each passing million years, things got worse. Oxygen levels continued to fall, the climate changed, ecosystems collapsed. More and more species vanished, and even the most resilient giants began to yield to the pressure of new environmental conditions. Among the last to fall were the Paleodictyoptera, an ancient order of flying insects that managed to survive until the end of the Permian period. They could be considered the first gliders of the ancient world. These six-winged masters of flight reached wingspans of up to 22 inches, placing them among the largest flying insects in the planet's history. And surprisingly, they didn't meet their end because of predators or climate shifts, but from plants. For millions of years, Paleodictyoptera were perfectly adapted to their world. They had complex, piercing, sucking mouthparts and fed on juices, spores, and pollen, all products of ancient vegetation like ferns, club mosses, seed ferns, and early conifers. But by the end of the Permian period, around 260 to 252 million years ago, the world entered an era of sweeping change. Familiar plant life, including ancient conifers, seed-bearing ferns, and other prehistoric flora, began to rapidly decline or disappear. Scientists believe the same culprit was once again the high levels of carbon dioxide, which made plants less nutritious. As a result, these plants were replaced by new, more drought-resistant species that could no longer provide the same food source. Paleodictyoptera were too closely tied to the vanishing flora, and, unable to adapt, they disappeared along with it. Predators are a new threat.
I just imagine what the forest and stuff would have looked like back then. It would have been beautiful, but fucking terrifying at the same time. Just not knowing what threat was behind every fucking leaf.
Although falling oxygen levels millions of years ago forced insects to shrink in size, scientists have long noticed a strange phenomenon. Even when atmospheric oxygen levels rose again, giant forms did not return. But why? This question became especially relevant while studying the beginning of the Cretaceous period, around 150 million years ago. At that time, atmospheric oxygen levels began to rise, reaching about 20%, compared to the 10 to 15% that had prevailed before. Yet insects remained relatively small. What stopped them from growing back to their former gigantic sizes? The answer was sought by paleontologists Matthew Clapham and Jared Carr of the University of California, Santa Cruz. They conducted a large-scale study, analyzing over 10,500 fossils of flying insects spanning the past 320 million years. The researchers divided this enormous dataset into 10 million year intervals. For each interval, they determined the maximum wingspan, a measure of how large insects could grow in each era. They then compared this with the oxygen levels in the atmosphere. Their goal was to understand when oxygen stopped being the main growth regulator for insects and what changed in Earth's ecosystems during that mysterious period between 150 and 130 million years ago. The results confirmed that for the first 170 million years of flying insect evolution, their size was directly linked to the oxygen concentration in the air. The more oxygen, the larger the insects, and vice versa. But between 150 and 130 million years ago, the rules of the game changed. The cause was the appearance of the first birds. It was during this time that Archaeopteryx emerged, the new, fearsome predators of the skies. They were small, feathered, crow-sized creatures, growing up to 20 inches in length and weighing just over 2 pounds. Although their flight was still far from perfected, they created a new evolutionary pressure for insects. The larger an insect was, the harder it was to maneuver, and the easier it was to catch. Soon, large gliding insects, relatives of today's dragonflies, disappeared. Their slow, graceful flight proved ineffective against these new feathered hunters. Birds tipped the balance for good. From now on, speed and agility mattered more than size. Over time, birds became increasingly nimble and skilled in flight. And between 90 and 60 million years ago, things got even worse for insects. A new predator entered the scene, the bat, specifically Onychonycterus, whose primary target was insects. The researchers' findings also revealed the broader picture. Over the past 100 million years, atmospheric oxygen has remained relatively stable at around 21%. Yet the largest modern insects only have wingspans of about 2.3 to 2.7 inches. Compare that to the late Triassic period.
Good. I'd rather not have bugs get any bigger than my fucking foot. I mean, you know, they're bugs that are already that big, but you know what I mean. It's just no. I'd rather not have bugs big enough where I can, you know, where I have to have a fucking gun to put it down.
Where oxygen levels were the same, but insects resembling modern grasshoppers had wingspans of 6 to 7 inches. This highlights a key point. Back then, there were no aerial predators, and insects could afford to remain large. Later, with the rise of bird species, predatory pressure began to limit insect size even with the same oxygen levels. According to John Harrison, an evolutionary biologist at Arizona State University, these findings support, though don't fully prove, the hypothesis that the emergence of birds and later bats became the key factor limiting the size of flying insects. Today, scientists are certain that the extinction of giant insects was caused by a complex chain of events unfolding over millions of years. The first blow was the disappearance of tropical swamp forests. In their place came scattered island-like groves with poor vegetation, making food harder to find. Then came bacteria capable of breaking down wood and releasing CO2. Atmospheric oxygen declined, and it became harder to oxygenate tissues. Insects began to shrink, and many species died out. The final blow came with the arrival of the first birds, active predators that hunted insects and competed with them for food. As a result, the world of giant insects, which had thrived 350 million years ago, was gone 200 million years later,
Good.
leaving behind
Fuck
only
that
their
world.
tiny descendants, now crawling beneath our feet. But what continues to puzzle paleontologists around the world is this. Even with today's oxygen levels, in the absence of predators, ancient insects could have been several times larger than their modern relatives. We've mentioned this before. Gigatitan vulgaris from the late Triassic period proves the point. An insect resembling a massive praying mantis with a wingspan of 16 inches. This fact leads scientists to suspect that predatory pressure, rather than oxygen alone, is now the main limiting factor for insect growth. Of course, the extreme sizes of the Carboniferous giants would be impossible without oxygen-rich air. But without natural enemies, modern insects could likely grow 2 to 3 times larger than they currently are. At the same time, if those ancient giants were somehow transported into our world today, their fate would be grim. The first thing they'd face would be oxygen shortage. Their bodies would begin suffocating almost immediately. The largest specimens wouldn't survive even an hour, and smaller ones, even if they hung on briefly, wouldn't last long either. Our modern climate is too dry and unstable for such creatures, and the predator presence far too high. Just imagine what a giant butterfly, like Paleodictyoptera from the Carboniferous period, would face if it suddenly appeared here and now. Oxygen deprivation, unfamiliar plants, an arid atmosphere, predators everywhere, not exactly worthy of envy. But would you fare any better if you suddenly found yourself in a world ruled by giant insects?
No. I don't think humanity would do very well in this fucking world. One, we would probably just... The oxygen levels would be too much for humans. And two, even if we were able to get past that part, I don't think many of us would survive very long.
The carbon world is against you. You're standing in the middle of a swampy wilderness where every step is a struggle. The thick, oxygen-rich air at first feels fresh and invigorating, but after just a few breaths, your head starts to spin. With every passing minute, your condition worsens. This level of oxygen is pushing you into hyperoxia, or oxygen poisoning. In this world, you're not at the top of the food chain, you're potential prey. Every movement you make echoes across great distances, and as you try to move more quietly, a giant dragonfly the size of a hawk swoops overhead with a whisper of wings. It assesses you and leaves. You're too big a target to bother with. Soon your vision begins to darken, and nausea sets in. The oxygen is slowly poisoning you, but that's the least of your concerns compared to what lurks in the undergrowth. Among the damp trunks and tangled vines hides the largest scorpion in Earth's history. It's over 2.3 feet long, and it's just noticed you. This giant has 2 pairs of eyes, giving it surprisingly good vision. But it's not interested in you as prey. It hunts smaller arthropods, mollusks, amphibians, and reptiles. To this creature, you're a threat, and it's ready to eliminate the threat the moment you get closer. It's armed with a curved tail and venomous stinger. One strike would be enough to end you. From the other side of the forest, pushing through the foliage, a millipede the size of an average crocodile slowly crawls into view. It's an omnivore that doesn't care whether you're prey or predator. It'll be content with the simple fact that you're no longer moving. It'll get to work as soon as the scorpion finishes its job. Things are looking grim for you. Your condition is worsening. Overhead, giant dragonflies buzz constantly, filling the air with humming vibration. And the forest shade harbors the silence of those who want to kill you, and those who just want to feed on you. Perhaps you think of taking refuge near the water, but that would be the worst decision you could make. Here, in the swamps and channels, rules the Orthocanthus, an ancient predator whose adult form could reach 3 meters long, nearly the size of a great white shark. It's fast, agile, and actively hunts. If it hasn't noticed you yet, it's only a matter of time. And even if you're lucky enough to avoid it, another danger awaits you in the water. One of the earliest sharks to evolve, Stephacanthus. With its strange anvil-shaped dorsal fin, this 6-foot predator would easily view you as prey and strike first. In this world, everything is against you. Oxygen is slowly destroying your body. First your nervous system, then your breathing processes, then circulation. It's not a quick death. Poisoning will be slow and agonizing. But the truth is, you likely won't survive long enough for oxygen to kill you. Something will get you first, like the giant scorpion, for instance. Finding yourself in this world would be worse than any nightmare. But now that we've uncovered what caused the downfall of the giant insects and have taken a glimpse into their era, we invite you to get to know the most fascinating inhabitants of this dangerous world. If you were to find yourself in the jungles of the Carboniferous period, the first sensation you'd feel would likely be lightheadedness, a sense of dizziness, and dimmed vision. This would be due to the excessive oxygen levels, so abundant that even a small spark could ignite wet wood. Looking down, you'd likely see your feet sinking slightly into the swamp, which would be typical since high humidity and swampy environments were a hallmark of the Carboniferous. But the real spectacle would be happening above you, in the sky. If you lifted your gaze, you'd see something similar to birds flying overhead, their wings emitting a loud buzzing sound and a noticeable vibration in the air. These were giant prehistoric butterflies, known as Paleodictyoptera. The wingspan of a typical representative of this species averaged 16 inches, with the largest specimens reaching up to 22 inches, nearly 10 times the size of modern flying insects. Paleodictyoptera were among the largest winged creatures of the Carboniferous. Their name, meaning ancient netted wing, refers to their intricate wing patterns, which resembled a delicate mesh. In addition to 2 standard pairs of wings with vibrant patterns, these insects also had small projections near their heads that may have acted as stabilizers during flight. On their heads they bore a proboscis used for consuming plant fluids, an early example of adaptation to this type of feeding style. Aside from their huge size, Paleodictyoptera had no way to intimidate you. They were harmless herbivores, interested only in the nutrient-rich juices of plants. The same could not be said of a ground-dwelling predator of the Carboniferous, posing a deathly threat to anything in its path. You wouldn't have trouble spotting it, since it was the largest scorpion in the planet's history, known as Pulmonoscorpius kirktonensis. It reached up to 28 inches in length. For reference, the largest modern scorpion, the emperor scorpion, barely grows to 8 inches. Pulmonoscorpius had a massive body covered with a chitinous exoskeleton, providing excellent protection from other predators. Its large, powerful pincers, equipped with sharp claws, allowed it to catch and hold prey. Meanwhile, its curved tail with a venomous stinger served as a death sentence for the prey captured under the pressure of the pincers. Pulmonoscorpius was an active predator that, as a rule, hunted smaller arthropods, mollusks, amphibians, and reptiles. Found both on land and in water, its adaptation to the water environment made it thrive as a predator in ancient seas. And if you wouldn't have trouble noticing this giant scorpion the size of a bull terrier, it would also easily spot you. It had 2 pairs of eyes, 2 set centrally for spatial perception, and another lateral pair likely for detecting light. Additionally, it may have had sensory receptors on its body, further enhancing its ability to navigate and locate prey. If you didn't consider yourself an arachnophobe before encountering this nearly 30-inch venomous scorpion, you might develop a newfound fear. But for now, let's return to the Carboniferous skies, where in addition to benign prehistoric butterflies, like Paleodictyoptera, we encounter winged predators. This predator would look strikingly familiar, as its descendants are around today. Dragonflies, except these were anomalously gigantic, over 10 times larger than their modern relatives. Meganora was one of the largest flying insects of all time. Looking at it, it's not that different from a regular dragonfly, albeit giant. And it kind of is. With a wingspan of 2.1 to 2.3 feet, and a body length of up to 1.3 feet, they rivaled modern peregrine falcons in size. Over 300 million years ago, these giant insects were fearsome aerial hunters. They held the title of apex predator of the Carboniferous skies until the end of the Permian period, when the first gliding reptiles emerged. And truly, their large, compound eyes, providing nearly 360-degree vision, allowed them to spot prey from above and below. Additionally, their strong legs, with spines for capturing prey, were features of very aggressive and dangerous predators. It's believed that their prey often included the aforementioned giant butterflies. Their adaptability to different environments allowed Meganora to employ a dual hunting strategy. They could perch at the proverbial watchtower, waiting to ambush potential prey, or actively pursue it in flight. Fast and agile predators, they excelled at sharp aerial maneuvers, deftly avoiding obstacles while chasing their targets. While giant dragonflies did not have formidable opponents in the air, living on land presented challenges even for the mighty Pulmonoscorpius, especially when faced with another colossal creature known as Arthroplura.
This one actually kind of looks cool.
A titan among terrestrial invertebrates, Arthroplura could terrify anyone with its appearance and size. It's the largest millipede ever to exist, and simultaneously the largest terrestrial invertebrate in Earth's history. The smallest members of this genus reached up to 12 inches in length, while the largest specimens reached an astonishing 8.5 feet and
God,
weighed
that's so fucking big.
110 pounds. Compare this to the longest living millipede today, Archospirostreptus gigas, which only grows to 13 inches. Their bodies consisted of 30 armored segments, each up to 1.6 feet wide, with a pair of legs under each segment. Like many arthropods, Arthroplura periodically shed its exoskeleton when it outgrew the protective outer shell. A new, stronger one would grow in its place. It's believed that Arthroplura had an extremely durable protective exoskeleton which could shield its encounters with predators. However, it's worth noting that such confrontations with other animals were very rare, since the Carboniferous period wasn't known for having many predators. Even giant scorpions would likely hesitate to attack a millipede several times its size. No fossil fragments have been found of the head and mouth parts of these giants, so the diet of the larger specimens remains uncertain. However, scientists speculate that these crawling manifestations of insectophobia likely fed on decaying plant matter and seeds. Presumably, young individuals were likely strictly vegetarian, while adults might have occasionally treated themselves to decaying meat or even preyed on small animals. But the unique nature of the Carboniferous jungle does not stop here. Among the swamps, another predator lurked in anticipation of small reptiles and amphibians. It looked like an unusually large spider, although it wasn't a true spider. It was a distant relative, a sea scorpion known as Megarachne.
Yeah, no, I'm good.
Its incredible resemblance to spiders initially misled paleontologists when they first came across its fossilized remains, prompting them to presumably give it the name of Megarachne, which translates to big spider. However, after some time, it became clear that Megarachne was a sea scorpion of a noteworthy size. Its body length reached 1.8 feet, and its unique structure allowed Megarachne to feed using a method called sweep feeding. With paddle-like appendages, it would scrape through soft sediment in aquatic environments like swamps and rivers, capturing and consuming small invertebrates such as worms, insects, and smaller arthropods. Occasionally, it spoiled itself with terrestrial prey like reptiles and amphibians. However, the land animals were likely faster than Megarachne and were therefore less accessible prey. It appears that this sea scorpion would hide in a burrow or river, waiting for victims that came too close to its deadly lair. As for active hunting, its ancestor, Pterygotus, a giant sea scorpion that lived over 400 million years ago, fared much better. This species was not only more dynamic, but it was also larger than Megarachne. Its length was almost comparable to the height of an average human, 5.2 feet. And if you think this arthropod is unusually large, that's only an illusion. Compared to the giant named Hibbertopterus, Pterygotus takes a back seat. The length of the largest Hibbertopterus specimens could reach 6 to 6.6 feet. They were likely record
huge.
holders as the heaviest of their kind due to their broad and compact bodies. This giant's feeding method was not that different from that of its smaller
Almost looks like one of those helmet crabs.
relatives. It was still the same sweep feeding method, except their diet may have included larger reptiles and amphibians. And no, this still isn't the limit for giant arthropods. The largest representative of this kind can confidently be considered Gryphonknight, which lived 400 million years ago. It reached a size of about 7.5 to 8.5 feet, making it one of the largest arthropods ever discovered. This giant's primary tools for defense and hunting were its claws. They could be approximately 1.4 feet long and were powerful enough to grab and easily crush their prey. However, such a large size did not equate to massive weight. Due to the simplicity of its anatomy, and despite having a length comparable to a car, the weight of a Gryphonknight likely did not exceed 220 pounds.
That's still fucking heavy.
Not all creatures of the Coniferous period were affected by the giant gene. Amid the humid prehistoric jungle, where enormous dragonflies filled the skies and the waters harbored giant scorpions, there were other beings, creatures so tiny you would struggle to spot them underfoot. Given the name Trigonotabida, these can be considered prototypes of the first spiders in history. The smallest members of the species were just a few millimeters long, while the largest grew to 2 inches. These were the earliest terrestrial arachnids known to science. Having appeared over 400 million years ago, long before the Carboniferous period, they were fully adapted to breathing air and no longer dependent on water. Their appearance was not too dissimilar to modern spiders. The body was divided into a cephalothorax
It looks more like a modern tick than a spider.
and an abdomen segmented and covered in chitinous plates. Their legs were also similar to spiders. However, unlike modern spiders, they could not spin webs. Their cephalothorax was protected by a carapace, earning them the nickname armored spiders. These were some of the smallest predators of their
Honestly, like I said, they look more like ticks than they do spiders.
time, hunting soft bodies invertebrates like worms, for example. They likely didn't use venom for hunting and instead relied on
Now that
grabbing
looks
their
more like
prey
a
with
spider.
their legs, holding it in place to consume it. It's possible that they also fed on plants, not unlike certain mites that, for reference, had a similar appearance to Trigonotobida. The Carboniferous period was a playground for evolutionary experiments. Unique, gigantic, and often dangerous creatures dominated the air and land. Yet perhaps one of evolution's most fascinating experiments of this time period was conducted underwater, creating some of the most well-armored creatures of the era. Lepidocaleus was an ancient worm species that lived around 400 million years ago on the territory of modern Australia.
Of course, because it's fucking Australia.
They thrived on shallow reefs and fed on organic waste. Measuring only a fraction of an inch in length, these creatures could only be observed in detail under a microscope. However, they have another, more memorable nickname, the Excalibur worm. This name, inspired by the legendary sword of King Arthur, was earned for good reason. Externally, they resembled heavily armored knights, covered in overlapping plates of calcite crystals that extended along their entire body. This armor provided extremely durable protection. Beneath the crystal layer was a light exoskeleton, similar to how knights wore chainmail beneath their armor. Additionally, the Excalibur worm could curl up into a ball, protecting its unarmored and therefore vulnerable body parts. The sharp edges of its crystalline armor made it even more formidable to potential enemies, as they would protrude outward when the worm curled up. Few creatures were capable of harming these armored worms. Biting through their crystalline shell was nearly impossible, and swallowing them was not a great option either. Evolution provided these worms with flawless defenses, but in the end, this came at a significant cost. Even this solid protection that guaranteed safety from predators had a downside. The heavy armor limited their mobility, making it difficult to search for food or disperse to new habitats. As a result, the Excalibur worm left no noteworthy descendants. Their ultimate extinction coincided with the mass extinction at the end of the Devonian period.
Well, it sucks to be the worm then. Well, that is the end of this video. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you did, please make sure to give a like and subscribe. I post videos 3 to 5 days a week here. I also post videos over on my other channel for gaming as well. So please make sure to give that a look-see. See if you enjoy that as well. I also stream anywhere from 3 to 5 days a week as well. Links to all my social medias will be on my YouTube page. And with that being said, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye-bye.